Hi again, this is Christine, the neuropsychologist from the Long COVID service. Today's session is going to focus on another cognitive function, which we refer to as executive functions. In this video, I will talk about what executive functions are, how we might use them in our daily lives, and have a think about why executive functions are so important to us. You may remember from session 1 that we discussed executive functions as the CEO of the brain. They take a role in coordinating the other mental processes we've discussed, such as attention and memory. The term executive functions is actually an umbrella term, which refers to a wide range of skills and abilities that are involved in the tasks that we perform day to day. These executive functions play an important role in coordinating how our other cognitive functions work. And the reason that we refer to executive functions as the CEO of the brain is because they allow us to perform complex tasks due to this role in coordinating those cognitive functions and managing our behaviours. Executive functions do also have an important role in guiding our social behaviour. Let's move on now to think of some real-world examples of how we might use executive functions in our daily lives. Executive functions help us to create goals and plans and stick to these over time. For example, it might be going to the gym ahead of a holiday and continuing to do this over the upcoming weeks before the holiday begins. Executive functions help us with noticing errors and correcting these accordingly. They are important for helping us getting started on a task or allowing us to do things in the right order to achieve our goals. They also help us to control our impulses so that we can think before we act, and they help us with organisation and planning. Our executive functions help us to oversee our thoughts and feelings and allow us to adapt our behaviour according to the situation. They help us to problem solve through any difficulties we might encounter along the way and to regulate our emotions so we do not feel too overwhelmed. They also help us to manage our social behaviours. So an example of this might be acting differently in different settings. How we speak to our friends and family members might be very different to how we speak to our work colleagues. They allow us to do tasks in the right order to help us achieve our goals. So a good example of this might be following a recipe. We need to follow the stages of the recipe in order so the food is prepared correctly. And they allow us to guide our behaviour to fit the task at hand. So as you can see from these examples, executive functions oversee a lot of complex and important skills that we use in our daily lives. So let's move on now to think about why executive functions are so important. Let's imagine that the brain is a control tower of a busy airport. Your executive functions would be akin to the air traffic controller. An air traffic controller has to give full attention to the plane's landing and taking off, as well as trying to coordinate the crew and ground staff to avoid a crash. Much like an air traffic controller, your executive functions take on the role of trying to coordinate the world around you to allow you to navigate it successfully. To do this, our executive functions might need to regulate the flow of information we receive, help us prioritise our tasks, make it possible to juggle multiple tasks at once by guiding our attention in different directions, support us to pay attention and filter out any unwanted distractions, enable us to plan ahead for the next step, help us to remember and follow important rules, which might also be linked to our memory processes, and remain focused on the goal that we are trying to achieve. Our executive functions also help us to adapt our course of action as a competing demand or a changing circumstance arrives, and they guide and coordinate our other cognitive functions to allow us to update our actions based on new information that we receive. Under normal circumstances, our executive functions allow us to effortlessly perform very complex tasks all the time throughout our daily lives. Even a more simple task, such as brushing our teeth, relies on our executive functions, and your facilitators will move on next to talk about this in an example. So that's a very short overview of what executive functions are and why they can be important in our daily lives. As you can see, they're involved in so many tasks that we perform day to day. We like to think of them as the CEO of the brain because they play an important role in governing the way that we navigate the world. Do remember, if you have any questions about this information that we've just discussed, or about neuropsychology and long COVID in general, please do ask your group facilitators to pass these questions on, and I'll be very happy to try and answer them for you. Thank you.